Hi, this is Greg Levine. It's the party line for August the 5th, 2011, and we're all still here. Now, it's going to be really hard for me not to talk about all that agonizing, compromising, anything but tranquilizing, right on tawdry affair that went down over the weekend on Capitol Hill and in the bowels of the White House, but I got a lot to talk about. In fact, I got so much to talk about, I'm not going to talk about all of it. It's in the Post. It's now your problem. Give it a read. There's lots of information there today. Now, August 2nd, where were you? You were watching the Senate, weren't you? You were probably just watching the floor of the Senate. You knew it was going to happen there. I mean, really no suspense. Better, I think, you should have done what I did, which was turn your attention to the hearing room where the Senate Committee of Environment and Public Works had the Joint Committee, Full Committee, and Subcommittee for Clean Air and Safety. Had a special hearing on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission Near-Term Task Force report on the future of nuclear safety, because that's where the excitement was. Well, okay, it wasn't really where the excitement was, but there were a couple of things to be learned, and there are real issues being handled here. Most broadly, what is the U.S. response going to be to lessons learned from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in Japan, if any? Now, I talked about a few weeks back what was called the Near-Term Task Force report. It was a task force put together by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they were supposed to come up with a series of recommendations based on what we had learned from the disaster in Japan. And they delivered that report around middle of July, and not a whole lot seemed to happen the first couple of weeks. I talked about the report, good as far as it goes, but it didn't go very far. There were some negative, slow-walking kind of responses from members of the House committee that has oversight over nuclear issues. Senator James Inhofe, who's on the EPW, the Senate committee, where this hearing was, basically called blatantly for a slow-walking of the report. The commission, made up of 5 members, 2 of which, one being the commission chair, Gregory Jaczko. I think I said Jaczko a few weeks back. I now believe that's not how you pronounce it. I apologize. Gregory Jaczko wants to dispose of these recommendations in 90 days. What that means is not that they'll all be implemented, but they'll come to some agreement on implementing them, that rules will be drawn, and then like in 5 years maybe those rules will be enforced. That and one other commissioner they think it can pull off in 90 days. The other 3 commissioners want to hear more from stakeholders, which is a really overused term in terms of this commission and this committee for the nuclear industry, for the people who have more interest in, say, profit than they do in public safety. And so that was sort of the stage was set in this committee between the people who favored disposal of the recommendations in 90 days and those who couldn't even get to that point, who couldn't commit to any time frame even for dealing with the recommendations. Let's not talk about implementing any rules. You had predictable partisan lines being drawn. Senators like Lamar Alexander and Jeff Sessions were frankly astounded to find out that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was tasked first and foremost with the protection of the safety of the general population and to make sure that the nuclear industry operated in a safe and efficient manner. They couldn't believe that you didn't also take into account profits of the nuclear industry and the cost of safety when like for right out of the box. And you know, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is not made up of a bunch of anti-nuke radicals here. These are people who all basically believe in nuclear energy, nuclear power, making it part of our energy mix here in this country. None of them are alien to the industry. But some of them actually believe it should operate within a certain set of guidelines, and that was sort of the general position of the other side of the aisle. Very important to realize here that there was really nobody up there on either side being the commissioners or the senators or Democrats or Republicans, who were basically saying, we should take a look at what Germany has done. We should take a look at what Japan is probably going to do, which is to rapidly shift our emphasis away from nuclear energy as a source of electrical generation to renewables, to wind, solar, and God knows what we haven't really thought of because we haven't had the motivation to think of yet. Nobody was really making that case. If there was someone who came close, it was Bernie Sanders, but even he didn't say outright, you know, let's take a lesson from Angela Merkel. No, instead what you had are arguments that, you know, gosh, this task force came together, they came together quickly, they came up with some fairly reasonable recommendations, so let's get to the business of implementing these. In fact, Barbara Boxer noted that it took about 10 years to implement some recommendations that were made about plant security right after 9/11. I had to chuckle because maybe implemented on paper. I don't think that most watchdogs would say that they've truly been implemented across the board on America's nuclear facilities. But that aside, Barbara Boxer actually made a really interesting cogent argument for regulation as a good thing for the nuclear industry, in that if the nuclear industry really wants to expand, to go forward, to prosper as it does, as Sessions and Alexander and James Inhofe all want it to do, then it's really important for it to be a well-regulated industry, because only then will it have the trust of the consumer, of the marketplace, of the people, and only then can it operate, you know, without having to look over its shoulder every 5 seconds. And, you know, honestly, a well-regulated industry would be a cheaper industry, would be a safer industry, and would be a more trusted industry. It's a good argument. It's a good argument for government regulation in general. You know, I can think of examples, for instance, with mad cow and beef, where actually smaller producers were begging for more government regulation so that they could assure import countries outside the United States that their beef was safe, and only like some big agribusiness stood in the way because, God, red tape, costs money, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, good argument in general. Unfortunately, it papers over a lot of the problems with nuclear regulatory industry in general, a Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the industry in general, most notably, most recently, the expose done by the Associated Press that shows just how cozy regulators and the nuclear industry are, so that even if you have a perception of a regulatory body that functions as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission supposedly does, in practice, regulation is lax, it is slow to react, it is insufficient, and in fact often in cahoots with the industry that it's supposed to watch. And unfortunately, the Commission is then in turn supposed to be watched by elected representatives who are many of them beholden to the nuclear industry for campaign contributions. I mean, their hooks are in deep to a lot of the people who are sitting on that panel, and as even Barbara Boxer noted, she has 2 nuclear facilities in her state. She noted it in terms of the fact that millions of people live near, say, San Onofre, and you need a strategy if something goes wrong to evacuate those people. But it wasn't missed by me, and probably not by others, that she's also pointing out that they're a constituent, a deep-pocketed constituent. You know, certainly true for Carper. Senator Carper was on the committee. You know, even Bernie Sanders has nuclear facilities in his backyard. All that to be considered. Of course, you know, there were some jaw-dropping moments like Lamar Alexander contending that no one had ever died in a nuclear accident, either at a United States power plant or on a United States nuclear submarine. Probably news to 4 workers at Surrey 2 in Virginia over the years. Probably news to the crew, families of the crew of the USS Scorpion. Technically, I guess you could say that the workers at Surrey died of being burned by steam before the radiation issue came to the fore. Technically, we've never quite gotten to the bottom of what caused the Scorpion to plummet to the bottom of the ocean, and basically implode from the pressure. So yeah, I guess they didn't die from nuclear accidents. There was, however, a nuclear explosion in 1959 in a reactor on a demonstration, a prototype nuclear submarine called the Triton. So, you know, technically, I guess maybe Lamar Alexander's right. Oh, and let's not forget the minimum 430 infants who died soon after 3 Mile Island disaster because of, but they weren't at the facility, so it doesn't count. But I digress, really. I mean, these are the kind of points that are being made. Jeff Sessions went on about how nuclear energy was a clean, safe, cheap domestic source of energy, which is like a quadruple lie, which unfortunately no one seemed to have the inclination on the panel to rebut it at all. It's just sort of this weird accepted thing. I've explained in the past, I'll explain, I'm sure, in the future why none of that is true. But overall, it's funny because, like, okay, I want to argue for a quick disposal, frankly, a quick implementation of these recommendations, but it's really hard to get excited about them because they're not even the bare minimum. They're the kind of things that should have always been the case. It's about standardizing regulations. It's about updating plans when new seismic or oceanographic information comes in. It's stuff like that. It's not even, it doesn't even recommend for a final disposal of spent fuel rods. It just says that we need a way of keeping the pools where they're now stored cool in case of a disaster. All right, so like common sense, and if not before, certainly after Fukushima. But like really, that's not the big discussion that I want to be having. I want to be having the kind of discussion they had in Germany. I want to be having the kind of discussion they're still having in Japan. I mean, in Japan, people are getting fired because of what's been happening there. In the United States, we have a hearing where we have to decide between the forces of slow walk this because government red tape is bad for business, and the forces that say, well, let's all agree to have people draft rules in 90 days so that we can then put them up for public discussion and maybe implement them in 5 years. Hard to get psyched about that. But that's what we got to get psyched about, at least right now. To her credit, Barbara Boxer has said she'll hold hearings every 90 days to try and push this thing forward. So let's talk again in November, when I'm sure all we'll be thinking about is this nuclear issue and nothing about, say, the super committee and the debt and no, just the nuclear issue. That's all we'll be talking about, I'm sure. Everything else has been taken care of. We're fine. Fine. I tell you, fine. We're fine. And that's the party line, okay? See you next week.